Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Vince, and I've been doing admissions since 1989 and college counseling since 1998 in California.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, a college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good morning, friends. I'm stoked this morning for a lot of reasons. I've got a friend I haven't seen in 12 years who's driving here right now from Orlando to stay the night with us. The last week of August is also coming up, and that's our family reunion. And my mom has always wanted the whole family to go to Bermuda, which is where she's from, for a cruise. And my sister organized it. And we're 7 weeks away, so it feels real now. So I'm getting excited about that. So I'm in a super great mood. I hope everybody had a great holiday. Karis is with us for a week before she goes back to Raleigh, and we grilled a feast like none other this July 4th. 3.5 hours. There's some work in that grilling away, but it was a lot of fun. But I hope you guys had some good time with your family. Friends, episode 550 is here today. That's a big one. It seemed like it was just the other day. You all were calling in and sharing lessons you've learned in the college process. We did that on episode 500. We're going to do that again on 600. So just a reminder, if you have a lightning bolt of inspiration of something that's been a real tip that's guided and helped you in your college journey, you might want to record it in whatever system you use. I'm a big notes app person. Other people like to journal, whatever your system is, because we're doing that again in episode 600. We want to hear from you. But I just want to thank everyone who's played a role in these 550 episodes. Special thanks to our co-hosts. I can't believe it's been 3 full years since we expanded our co-host team. Special thanks to our support team, especially Nemanja, our sound engineer, and Stylionis, our webmaster. But mostly thanks to you, our listeners. There is no podcast without you. I especially want to thank anyone who's either sent in a SpeakPipe question, been a guest on our podcast, said something positive about us on social media, told a friend, relative, colleague, neighbor, school counselor about your college-bound kid, or given a donation on our website to keep us afloat. Like I said, there is no Your College-Bound Kid without our listener. You truly are the wind beneath our wings. And, you know, all the little comments you make about how the podcast has helped, that's like the gas in our tank that keeps us putting in the effort to come back every single week or twice a week. Now, in today's episode, I'm going to share a conversation from the counseling room. Now, the same thing happened to me twice in back-to-back days. And when that happens, it's a signal to me that this is a teaching opportunity. I'm also going to share a bombshell announcement from Indiana University. And then I'll finish up the 3-part series I began 3 weeks ago on holistic admissions. And then we'll have a brand new 4-part interview with Chris Teare, a college counselor who's been on both sides of the desk and 5 decades of experience. And we're just going to bounce around and discuss a range of issues over the next 4 weeks. All right, let's dive in. So I want to start out with talking about the counseling room. So back-to-back days, I had the same experience. There's a question on our questionnaire that we use. It's question 46 in section 3. And I'm going to read it to you. It says this. First of all, in big red font, it says pressure. We kind of use like a caption for the keyword for each of the questions. So this one says pressure in red font. And then it says, are you feeling any pressure from friends or family members to attend a certain kind of college? If so, explain. Now, this is on both, this is on the student questionnaire. So obviously We have a different parent questionnaire. This is a student questionnaire, section 3. So I want to read the response I got on Monday. I want to say it was, well, the days are going together to me. I just know it was back-to-back days. So this is a response I got in reading this answer. Oh, for sure! Exclamation mark. I think my mom really wants to brag to her friends about how her kids go to blank school and do blank because she already brags about us. And I think that not going to an impressive school would embarrass my mom. Okay, so that was the first response. And then the next one, literally the next day, this is what it said. And by the way, one boy, one girl, so it's not a gender thing. One boy, one girl, one East Coast, one West Coast. It's not a geographic thing. Here's the second one. I feel like if I don't get into a decent college with a somewhat known reputation, my parents wouldn't want me to go. Now, check out the third word here. I am afraid I won't get into a school that they will like. Now, here's the thing. Normally, I can pick this up a mile away just because I've been doing this for a while. In fact, I'm going to hit my 2,000 student coming up here in about a month since I started this work all the way back in 91. But I'm going to hit my 2,000 student. So I've been doing this a while. And normally I can see this coming a mile away. In neither one of these cases, with either of these parents, did I pick this up at all. And I'm always picking this vibe up. But not in this instance, neither one of them. And there's a whole bunch of questions we ask for parents, and then you interact with parents. I can usually see this. And when I see it, I confront it. I remember, it's going back a ways now, like I didn't even have my company that long, 2011 or 2012. I shared a story with a family because the dad, I felt like right in front of his student, he kept bringing up Harvard. And great kid, but not the Harvard profile. So that always concerns me, right? Because I'm hearing the dad talk about Harvard all the time in front of the daughter. And I, from my history of doing this doesn't look like somebody who's going to get into Harvard. Great kid, but just not a Harvard student. So I shared a story with the dad of how a student that I worked with, who was an extraordinary student, in fact, went to an incredibly difficult school to get into, but ended up being in counseling. And then when they were in counseling, it came out that the student felt that her dad had been let down because she never got into Harvard. And that's part of what was impacting the need for counseling. So I shared that with dad. And he's like, I get it. I hear you. And then the next meeting, he says, what about Yale? Right in front of his student. So I know what it's like when I see that. Another situation, I was talking to a student 5 years ago. I could tell something was bothering her. And I said, what's wrong? Is everything okay? And then she started talking about me about the pressure she was feeling from her mom. Now, I'm never, ever going to let a student know that I was picking that vibe up from mom. So I just said to the student, well, don't you think she just wants what's best for you? And the student says to me, 4% of it is she wants what's best for me. 96% of it is she wants to brag to her friends about where I go to college. So I said to the student, would it be okay if I had a conversation with her and let her know that's what you're thinking? And she said, I would love that. So those kinds of conversations aren't fun. The mom handled it exceptionally well. But those aren't fun. So I see it, and I know when I see it. This was not what I'm talking about here. This was it had to be subtle because I didn't pick this up at all in any answer or any interaction at all from parents. So this is the point. Our kids have a lot of fear. There's a tendency to think they don't care what I think. They all they care about is what their friends think. They don't care about what I think. Nothing could be further from the truth. Until kids go to their grave, they're trying to make their parents proud of them. And I believe this partially explains why sometimes I have a parent that really wants to start the process and their kid is not there. I believe part of it is there's this fear of, I'm not sure if I can live up to your expectations. Now, that's not always the case. I'm not even saying that's the majority of the case, but I definitely believe that's some of the case. And all of us almost always have the best intention for our kids. But how does this happen? Well, here's my experience. In general, kids have a better sense on how selectivity has changed than their parents do over the years. And my theory on this is that a lot of times they've seen the class above them. Maybe they're in an AP class with the kid and they think this kid is wicked smart and then they don't get into these places, but they're just closer to seeing the decisions from the class above. And so my experience overall, obviously there's lots of exceptions, is that kids have a better sense. And so it's very easy for kids to get this fear. And here are some of the ways that that fear is generated. If the colleges you visit are all super selective, that's going to create fear. If the colleges you discuss or suggest, that's going to create fear. If there's a certain reaction to mailers that come in from certain schools, and we're all human, this is very easy to do this. You know, it's very, 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 very easy to do for all of us. But these are the kinds of things that are creating this fear out there. And I think the single biggest thing that any parent can do to help here is to tackle our own belief systems. And I know that this would be a challenge for me. When any one of my students would have come to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I want to go to community college," I don't know what I might have said something. Hey, if that's what you want to do, but I know I would have been thinking that. It wouldn't have been a favorable thoughts going on in my head. So we have to first start with our own belief system. And there's a big price that our nation is paying for pressure that kids are under from peers. And sometimes it's worse from peers, by the way. I cannot tell you how many times I have had parents that are trying like crazy to take the pressure off, but they're getting it from the peer group. But it's the combination of both. It's overwhelming. Do you know there's schools in this country where the mental health professionals every year are on suicide watch on Ivy Day? That's how sick this thing has gotten. I believe the single best advice I can give to help eliminate some of the stress in this area is to first believe in your heart that there are hundreds of good colleges that your student could end up with and not a couple dozen. Because there's nothing you can tell them that will convince them you're not disappointed by their colleges if you, in fact, really are. They know you too well. You can't cover it up. So I believe it starts with the belief system of accepting that there's hundreds of good schools, not a couple dozen. And the second thing is letting it be their experience and letting it be their opportunity. We all had our opportunity. I always say your kid's college decision is not your do-over. We all live through our students vicariously to some extent, but it's not our chance to try to help them to be a doctor because we wished we'd gone to med school. And now we want them to do it. That's not our role, nor is it to, in my opinion, remove them having a big voice in the decision of where they go. So I just really want to do everything I can to help kids not feel this fear and feel this pressure. One of my personal goals with this podcast and in my counseling is for kids to feel better about themselves when they end this process than when they start. One of the things I tell my students is I like you to have 3 likelies or probables on your list that you'd be happy to go to. And the main reason I say that is, one, so that if some funky stuff happens and you don't get in one, you're not shut out, but also because I don't like it when kids get more no's than yeses. The kids that I see that feel the best about the college process when it's done are kids that ended up having more yeses than no's. I had another statement that came on in our questionnaire about 6 months ago, and I never forgot this. And it was someone from Massachusetts, and originally, and this is what they said. I grew up in a world where you do everything in your power to get in the most selective college you can, and then you go to that most selective college, whichever school it is. And then you spend the rest of your life name-dropping the school at every social function. This was how I grew up. But this is what I liked. He went on to say, I no longer believe that. Kids will perform best when they're happiest, and they'll have better mental health. So it's just something I wanted to share. I know this isn't easy. One of the best conversations I had was 4 years ago. It was a mom from Arizona. And I just loved the conversation because she was so honest. She said, I'm trying so hard to give up this name thing, but it's just so hard. And I just appreciated her honesty and her willingness to wrestle with it. All right, enough of that. That was kind of deep. All right, let's transition now to a bombshell story from Indiana University. And, I always go back and forth with whether I read articles because, you don't really find people reading articles on podcasts because I think it's kind of boring for the most part. But sometimes I feel like there's kind of no way better for you to get the full article than for me to read it. So I'm going to read this to you. This article is all over the web. Came out a few days ago. I'm going to read the one from Inside Higher Ed from Ryan Quinn. Shout out to Ryan Quinn for a great article. And it's entitled, Indiana Public Universities to Voluntarily End 19% of Their Degrees. That's a big number. And here's what it says. Ahead of a new law setting a minimum number of graduates for academic programs, institutions have vowed to cut or merge more than 400 undergraduate and graduate degrees. Indiana Public University institutions plan to eliminate or consolidate over 400 programs, equaling roughly 1/5 of degree offerings statewide, the Indiana Commission for Higher Education said on Monday. The announcement came just before a new state law took effect, setting minimum requirements for how many graduates individual programs must produce at the universities and Ivy Tech Community College, or face termination. Republican state legislatures passed the law, a state bill with major higher education provisions tacked on less than 2 days after revealing it in April. It says institutions can ask the commission for approval to keep offering degrees that don't meet the threshold of average annual graduates, but the universities voluntarily submitted the first wave of hundreds of programs to be ended or consolidated, the commission said, meaning they didn't ask for exemptions. According to a list posted by the commission, among the 400 degrees to be nixed or combined into others are many foreign language and teacher education programs. The list also includes undergraduate and graduate degrees in fine arts, English, business, economics, philosophy, history, anthropology, sociology, journalism, public administration, social work, labor studies, political science, American studies, Africana studies, women and gender studies, religious studies, classical studies. STEM and medical disciplines aren't being spared either. The eliminated consolidated degrees include some in health, biology, chemistry, math, comp sci, comp engineering, electrical engineering, mechanical engineering. Indiana University of Bloomington, for instance, is ending its PhD in astrophysics. More than half the programs to be eliminated or merged are in the IU system. There's only one university in the state that didn't volunteer to submit programs to be cut. The law's threshold for associate degree programs is graduating an average of 10 students a year over the last 3 years. The threshold is 15 students for bachelor's degree programs, 7 for master's degrees, 3 for each specialist programs and doctoral programs. And there's so many more programs that I didn't read about. They're cutting dance programs. They're cutting their ballet program. They're cutting just a ton of them. Indiana's program slashing can be seen as another consequence of the broader push by red state legislatures to intervene in higher ed by restricting teaching, attacking tenure, and now dictating curricula. But the fact that Indiana's public universities are taking the opportunity to reduce degree offerings without seeking exceptions allowed by law may indicate that they, like public institutions in other states, want to pare down programs themselves for what may be financial, academic, political, or other reasons. Faculty are not pleased. This is the sort of devastation wrought upon IU, both the flagship campus and the regionals, said Ben Balthazar, Secretary-Treasurer of IU's South Bend campus, chapter of American Association of University Professors. Heather Aku, the president-elect of IU Bloomington Faculty Council, said the council didn't get to vote on these draconian cuts and mergers at the flagship campus. Not only did we not vote, we were not even consulted, Aku said. In May, within a week or two of Republican Governor Mike Braun signing the minimum enrollment bill into law, Aku said she heard faculty say things like, "Our chair says we are being threatened with merger, and there are negotiations going on about how to save programs." She recalled listening to a meeting in which Dean of Bloomington College of Arts and Sciences said the provost was only willing to request a handful of exemptions. Aku also blamed the capitulation of the IU president. "There's no daylight between President Pamela Whitten and the governor in Indiana," Aku said. "She will literally do whatever the governor wants." Indiana Higher Education Commissioner Chris Teare, though, praised the thoughtful volunteer review and reduction conducted by Indiana's public institutions. "Our institutions want to ensure the programs they're offering are responsive to student demand and fit the needs of Indiana's evolving economy," Lowry said in a news release. "The primary beneficiaries of this work will be students who face an overwhelming number of degree programs as they make their educational career decisions." Speaking in the same release, Braun similarly said fewer programs will help students make more informed decisions about the degree they seek to pursue and ensure there is direct connection between the skills students are gaining through higher ed and the skills they need the most. He said one of the priorities of the legislative session was that ensuring that institutions are preparing students for career opportunities in the most in-demand fields today and in the future. Of the 408 programs, the commission said 75 are being eliminated this summer, including 68 that have no students enrolled in them and 7 with a few students this summer. In addition, 101 programs will be suspended, with current enrollments allowed to finish their degrees. The commission said the remaining 232 will be merged with other programs. Neither the Commission for Higher Ed or IU provided any interviews for this article. In response to written questions, an IU spokesman said mergers would create 27 new programs, resulting in a net loss of 222 programs statewide. Otherwise, the spokesperson said in a statement, which doesn't say whether IU discussed the issue with faculty, IU campus leadership has collaborated with deans and administrators. Okay, so I don't want to bore you. I'm not going to read anymore. But there's a debate. Is this political? Is this financial? Is it financial and political? But this is a flagship school having this level of cuts. Now, I talked about West Virginia's cuts a while ago. But one, they were nowhere near as draconian. And two, West Virginia is seen as a much poorer state. So we got to come back and talk about what's going on in another episode. But I was having a conversation with somebody earlier this week, and we said nothing is safe right now because we've always known that community colleges and regional publics are under attack. Okay, but now when you look at the cuts, when you look at what's going on with all the money the schools lost when the aid was cut off, both NIH aid, but also the agricultural aid, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars for some schools. And those are your major R1 research institutions, the most selective schools in the country and wealthy flagship schools and major research institutions like Pittsburgh. So everybody is suffering right now. And I'm just going to come back and talk about this again. It's too in-depth of a conversation for me to have solo. So I have somebody in mind who would be a great person to talk about this with. And I've actually already emailed him late last night. He's a national leader, and I don't want to announce it until it's confirmed, but look for more conversations on this topic coming soon. All right. That's too depressing. I got to go on to another topic. Holistic admissions, which is something I really love. I really believe in it to the core. And I believe in it because of two main reasons. Holistic admissions is contextual admissions. It means I'm taking the ability of the student in their context under consideration. And also, holistic admissions is built on the understanding that we want to be somewhat intentional in how we build a class so that we're not missing important voices around the table or important people that can add important qualities to make our school stronger. So just to do a brief recap, I did a whole session on how the academic review works, and you can go back and listen to that. I did that 3 weeks ago. And then 2 weeks ago, I did one on how institutional priorities work. You may remember that. I talked about some people have a built-in lobbyist and some people are just folks, and we broke that down and what that looks like. And I expanded on what Harry Bald had said in his book. Okay, I promised you one more segment, and that's this segment. So I want to look at other things that colleges value besides just those things, passing the academic review and having institutional priorities in line with the school. I talked about it. What if a school, accepts 1 out of every 4 applicants? Well, about 75% make it through the academic review. How do you get from 75 to 25? Some of it's going to be IPs, institutional priorities, but that's not the whole picture. So something I talk about a lot on here, and I can't emphasize how big of a role it plays when it comes to schools that do holistic admissions. And I bet those of you who are listening who listen on a regular basis already know what I'm going to say, but it's personal qualities. I mean, one quote I read over and over and over to you guys is from Martin Walsh, former assistant dean of admission at Stanford. I'm going to read it again. I mean, the most common test we had at Stanford was not how smart are they and what had they invented, but it was actually, would you want to share a dorm room with this person for a year? That's personal qualities. So what personal qualities am I talking about? Let me just give you 15 really fast. You can think about these. I'm blowing through these. Integrity, adventuresome spirit, kindness, getting along with people who are very different from you, leadership, grit and resilience, intellectual curiosity, grace and mercy, sense of humor, dependable and reliable, likability, initiative and drive, teamwork and collaboration, compassion, empathy, good listener. Now, that's not even an exhaustive list. I literally sat down and just thought of those in 10 minutes. So I know I didn't get everyone, but those are the 15 that popped into my head immediately. Now, in order to understand the value of that, let's assume some of the opposite traits are present in students, like anger and bitterness, dishonesty, divisiveness, judgmental spirit. That can completely divide a community and make it an unwelcome place to learn and an unhealthy place to learn. All you have to do is look at the custom prompts and look at how many of them are designed to suss out whether a student has certain personal qualities. All right, it's not only PQs, though. It's also extracurricular impact. Let's go back again to the custom prompts. Look at how many of the custom prompts speak directly to this. I did a session yesterday with a family from Florida, and we literally looked at 3 different schools' custom prompts, Miami, Cornell, and Northwestern. And all of them were asking some version of this community impact question. Because colleges want difference makers. Colleges want people that will make the big splash. They don't want the person that graduates and nobody knows them. They want the person in their class that's going to be greatly missed by everybody. It's all impact, right? The personal qualities is personal impact, positive personal impact through personal qualities, and extracurricular impact. Now, this is important. It's going to be seen in holistically from the context of the opportunities that you had based on what your school offered. It's going to be seen, if it's full-blown holistic admissions, through the socioeconomic lens of what opportunities your family had. Okay? So not everybody is judged the same here because not everybody has the same opportunities. Too much is given, much is expected and required. Now, there's a saying in investing. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. But here's what they don't say. It's not a guarantee, but it's the best thing I have to go on. The best thing I have to go on is, did you have extracurricular impact and personal impact in your past 4 years? It's the best thing I have to go on. All right. But it's not only personal qualities. It's not only extracurricular impact. There are other things that can come in and can help a school decide, we got rid of a quarter because they didn't meet our academic standards. So now we're down to 75%. How are we going to get from 75 to 25? One of them is, are you interesting and unique? You ever had food without any spices? It's kind of bland. It significantly improves the food experience if you can spice it up. And that's how being interesting and unique is. The last 2 years, I've worked with rock climbers from California that were ranked in the top 50 and in the country. And that's the kind of thing. It just adds some spice because of their uniqueness. I'm working with a kid this year who's a juggler. That kind of stuff really can spice it up. And it makes the place an interesting place. Sometimes when colleges announce their incoming class, they usually have these announcements. They put out these press releases about their class. And sure, they'll talk about things like how many valedictorians or salutatorians and how many national merit scholars they have and how many states and how many countries. And usually they like to say, we had a record enrollment this year, blah, 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 about how selective they're getting. This is just common speech in these announcements. But you'll often see something that speaks to this interesting factor. Like they'll say something like, oh, we also have a ventriloquist who performs at birthday parties, or we have a social media influencer who started this on TikTok and now has these are the kinds of things that are included. Why? Because they add interesting factors. So that's another thing. The next one is demonstrated understanding and alignment with the mission. Demonstrated understanding, you get who we are. Alignment with the mission is you believe in what we value. What you're looking for is what we offer. Once again, look at the custom prompts. I'm going to read one from one of my favorite schools, University of San Diego, one of 42 changemaker campuses in the world. Here's what it says. As a proud changemaker campus, the USD experience emphasizes change-making through care for our common home, social justice efforts, civic engagement, social innovation, creativity, and global perspective. Write about one of the challenges facing humanity today and tell us why it matters to you. And tell us what experiences or insights have you had that speak to the urgency of this issue. Now, the University of San Diego is all about being a change maker. And you can see right in the prompt, they're using the prompt to suss out, are you a change maker? Are you in alignment with our mission? And when you are, that can be one of the things that can make a student with lower test scores, lower grade point averages, less rigor, be seen as a better fit than the person that has the higher class rank, higher grades, higher test scores, more APs. Next, and I don't want to talk about this too much because we talk about it a lot, demonstrated interest. If you're a school, you got to admit 8 kids to get 1. And all of a sudden, it's really clear to you that this kid wants to come either because they apply ED or maybe they didn't apply ED, but that you're so convinced from all the other interactions, this kid is going to come. That's very valuable. The lower the yield, the more valuable it is for you to know a student's going to come. And there's another one we don't talk about that much. It is, can we be transformational in your life? Have you ever asked yourself, why is it easier to transfer to a University of California school in the UC system from a California community college versus from another UC? It's true. It's easier to get into Berkeley or UCLA from Santa Monica Community College than it is to try to transfer from San Diego, Irvine, or Santa Barbara. Why is that true? Sure, part of it is it's in the California master plan. They say that, so it's an institutional priority. But also because you're already perceived as being at an R1 school with major resources coming from one of those other UCs. We want to be transformational in your life. Okay? Now, I know some of you are thinking, Stuck, you didn't say anything about interviews, recommendations, and all the writing. And the reason I didn't talk about that is because I focused on what colleges want, not how they evaluate what they're getting. Absolutely, interviews, recommendations, counselor, other, teacher, writing, resume, so many other things are very valuable, but they're part of the evaluation tool to see whether or not you're getting these things that I shared. Most admits have a confluence of multiple factors from the ones I listed, both here and off the institutional priority list. Well, hopefully you found this helpful. Let's transition now to a brand new interview I'm doing with Chris Teare.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, in part one of my interview with Chris Teare, Chris gives his backstory. Chris tells us a great story about Ted Fiske that really emphasizes the importance of fit. Chris talks about how college counseling has changed so much from the 80s. Chris talks about the increased pressure students and parents faced and when that pressure first came into the college process. And Chris talks about when U.S. News first launched its rankings in 1983 and how it impacted the world of college counseling. Chris has 5 decades of experience on both sides of the desk, and we talk about it over the next 4 weeks. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Chris Teare. I'm very excited. I like to bring you counselors that have done admissions and been on both sides of the desk, and Chris has got 5 decades of experience. Welcome to your College Bound Kid podcast, Chris.
Mark, thank you so much for having me. And the 5 decades aren't all professionals. Some of that is my own college
That's
search
okay.
and experience.
That's okay. We'll count it. 5 decades isn't always 50 years, right? It can be it can be 40 years.
That would be true. Well, this really is 50 years since my own college search, my tours, my interviews, my application. And it's been 45 years since I started working to help other people's children, and soon in this process.
Yeah, well, we love the veterans, and Chris comes by recommendation from Jim Bach, so we hold Jim in high regard over at Swarthmore College. So Chris, why don't you've whet the appetites of our listeners, give people your backstory and walk us through those 45 years, and then we'll get into talking about changes that you've observed and seen in those 45 years on both sides of the desk.
Well, thank you, Mark, again for having me. To start with some of the personal, I'm married. I'm the father of 3 daughters, a stepfather to 2 stepsons. 4 of them are through college, one's in college. Their schools include Agnes Scott College, Georgetown University, the University of Connecticut, the University of St. Joseph. 2 have graduate degrees from Loyola, Maryland, and Columbia University. So just in my family, I've got a range of experience. My own education was public high school in New Jersey, and then bachelor's in English at Amherst College, a master's in journalism at Columbia University, and then a master's in liberal arts from St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland, great books college. I've been a college counselor and administrator in the United States and Europe and the Virgin Islands. I've also done admissions work at Drew University. And 40 years ago, I was working in the Channel 2 newsroom in New York City and was soon thereafter a television anchorman in the Midwest. I've also been a newspaper columnist, a radio show host. I've contributed to Forbes, and I now do the work independently because I still love the kids and I empathize all the more with their parents. So that's
awesome. That's great. That was awesome. And I love all your kids being at different schools because that shows you really truly doing the fit and match work out here and understanding, different kids thrive in different environments. So why don't you take us all the way back and tell us what first got you interested in this work?
Thank you for the opportunity to do so. As a bit of a preface along the lines of what the right fit would be, Ted Fiske, the longtime editor of the Great College Guide, once told me a story that when he was in high school, he was called to the head's office, and the head of the school informed him, "Edward, I have arranged a place for you at Harvard." And young Edward said, "Harvard is too big for me, Dr. Gumry. I want to see Amherst and Wesleyan." And he interviewed with the Amherst dean, and the Amherst dean on the spot said, "We'd love to have you here." And Ted said, "Well, thank you, Dean Wilson, but I'd like to go see Wesleyan." "Oh, okay, that's a wonderful place as well. Give them our best, and I'm sure you'll make the right choice." Ted went to Wesleyan. And He knew himself, and it was then a very personal process. And one of the things that I think is so important is trying to keep that personal process at the heart of all we do, and helping students develop self-knowledge. My own search back in the 70s, I was a boy who loved college football and was raised Catholic, and so I thought I was going to Notre Dame until I realized I couldn't play at Notre Dame. So when it comes to my own search, exactly 50 years ago, doing tours, doing interviews, writing my application, the experience was very personal. And, it started with being a Catholic kid who loved football, thought he was going to go to Notre Dame, and realized he couldn't play there. And then had a dad who took him to talk to the Yale coach, who informed him that he wasn't good enough to play there either. And so on we went to Amherst and Wesleyan and Trinity and Williams. And the Amherst coach toured us, took us into the art museum, showed us his favorite painting, the recital hall, talked about concerts there. And I said, this is a football coach who knows there's more to life than football. So I'm loving this. And I went to do my interview with the dean of admission. I was terrified. He was enormous. I came in sweating off the tennis court, and I survived it. And I wrote him a thank you note. And a week later, I had a note back saying, it's wonderful. You're going to apply early decision. As far as I'm concerned, you have nothing to worry about. And it wasn't because I was that special. It was because it was more personal back then. And you could have these personal relationships with the dean of admission, and you could have conversations that panned out. I also, back at that time, learned some things about fit because one of my best friends got into Harvard with sophomore standing because he had so many AP credits and he hated the place so much he left after 3 semesters. And it was years before he went back to college because it was the wrong place for him. And I had friends and brothers who didn't get into their first choices and got into other choices, and they came to love those places. So I had a sense early on that these things have a way of working themselves out. And I was certainly blessed in my own case. My first job out of Amherst was teaching English and coaching football and lacrosse at William Penn Charter School in Philadelphia. And because I had taken one of my younger brothers on a 12 college tour throughout the Southeast before he chose Washington and Lee in Lexington, Virginia, I was interested in the college process and I asked for a chance to get involved with it. So I shadowed the college counselor the 1981-82 school year, and I had my own caseload in 1982-83. And that was about when Ted Fiske, the education editor of the New York Times, started the New York Times Guide to Selective Colleges. A year later, U.S. News and World Report started ranking colleges and learned that its swimsuit issue sold better than anything else it had on the newsstand. And the contrast between journalistic integrity, led by someone like Ted Fiske, versus trying to quantify the qualitative by putting numerical rankings on what really needs to be personal and subjective based upon unique individuals. I'm all for the former, and I really can't stand the latter. But they exist, and so we try to deconstruct them and work with them.
I have a question for you on that. Have you found any tools helpful to get people to, deprioritize rankings or not realize or to realize the subjective biases and, whether it's the formula aspect or you just can't, it's all got to be customized to you? I mean, I think for me, the best thing is kind of what you said, like your Harvard story. I've got some stories like that too, right? Where you talk about someone who goes to a place and hates it and admitted I went because of the ranking or the super low acceptance rate. I find
Right.
that's about the only thing I find that resonates. And with some people, it still doesn't resonate because for some people, the most important thing is, it seems like, is impressing people in your peer group, and others really are not. And I say that not in a self-righteous way, because I know there's a lot of pressure lot of pressure that kids feel validated by peers, and it can happen with parents just as much. But I don't know. Any thoughts on? We got a lot of parents listening. Some of them are fighting. Some of them are fighting that. Any suggestions there?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you have to respect people's decisions in the end, of course. But my sense of it is always trying to start with self-knowledge, with helping students develop a better understanding of who they are and expose them to different environments so they can think about what really works well for them. I use the Fiske College Guide Sizing Yourself Up survey with all of them. I use the AchieveWorks platform on College Planner Pro with a Myers-Briggs inventory and a multiple intelligences inventory and others to try to get at, okay, who are you and what will be best for you? Because I think there's an overemphasis on the day kids get in and not nearly enough emphasis on how they're going to be feeling about themselves the day they graduate. Because you want that fit to be right and you want them to be in a better position for young adult life at age 21 or 22 than at age 17 or 18. And so it's analogous to when students tell me what career they want to pursue, and I say, well, how do you know? How much time have you spent with people in that career, job shadowing, interning, really learning what that's like on a day in, day out basis? And so again and again, it's going back to the ancients, the inscription over the cave at the Oracle of Delphi was "Know thyself," because you would not be able to interpret what you were hearing from the oracle unless you really had self-knowledge. And so it's the attempt to develop that and then talk with parents. And a lot of what motivates parents, sadly and increasingly through my decades, is a combination of love and fear. And they love their kids, and they're scared for their futures. And so they will latch on to things along the lines of rankings saying, that's going to ensure my child's success in adult life. And the sad fact is that it can be the toughest place to get into, as with my friend in 1976, Harvard, and it can be totally the wrong place. So you try to have honest conversations about that. You try to look for opportunities to have discussion. But at the end of the day, if they want to choose the more highly ranked school, I'm going to say, I really hope it works out. And please let me know how you're feeling about it. And if it doesn't, we can try again.
Yeah, and the higher ranked school might be a great fit for them too.
It can be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely can be. I've had many
Yeah.
students, go to Ivy League schools and graduate very happily. And I'm in touch with a couple of former students who just graduated from Amherst and Williams and had marvelous experiences there. And, those are tough places to get into, and they were perfect for them. So it
Yeah,
can
it's
work.
always a balancing, right? Like sometimes I want to let people know selectivity is not everything. Rankings are
True,
not everything. But
true.
but most of the students that I've had that have gone to highly select, like the most highly selective, most of them have had good experiences. So you don't want to go all the way to the other extreme. Let's talk about the '80s, because this is your Penn Charter in Philly,
Yep.
starting to do your counseling there, and maybe we should take the whole period really from the early '80s all the way up until really the internet starts coming in the mid '90s, right? So Common App's out, but it's not like it is now because it's pre-internet. And talk about what applications were like pre-internet and how the search was different pre-internet. What do you want to share, kind of that sort of early '80s to mid '90s that might be of interest to our listeners who are very curious, and I think we'll find it interesting to get the perspective from someone like yourself.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing again in the 80s it was still very personal, and I vividly recall the visits of college representatives to Penn Charter and talking
Mm-hmm.
with, it was all male at the time, the boys there, and trying to make sure the right boys were in the room for the different representatives who would come. And there were just conversations that were not charged with anxiety and with the boys trying to impress anybody. They were just there to learn, to ask honest questions, and there was an authenticity to it that was really quite wonderful to observe. Back then, there were also a lot of handwritten essays.
Mm-hmm.
And even
Mm-hmm.
when I wrote my recommendations, I would turn them in handwritten to the guidance secretary, and she would type them up. It was a very different time. And, we were doing anecdotal comments on triplicate or quadruplicate paper where you would handwrite it or type on it and hope it, was firm enough to make all four copies. Some of it was almost pre-technology. The other thing that I experienced at Penn Charter, and this was before labels and categorizations of different groups, we had all these first gen kids, right? But I didn't know what a first generation applicant was. I just knew he was a great kid who had probably come in from a parochial school as a recruited athlete, and his dad delivered mail or drove a tasty cake truck, and he was at Penn Charter to prepare to go to college. And it was all about first gen. And, some of the kids, would call themselves working class, but they were right there and there was no label on them. They just were wonderful young men whose parents, in some cases, were making sacrifices to give them an opportunity that they, as parents, had never had themselves. And, it was just breathtaking work. And I'm still in touch with some of those guys. Some of the first guys I worked with are literally grandparents, and I'm in touch with them on Facebook, and we are still communicating about various things, and I'm so happy with the way their lives have turned out. The other thing that I experienced there, and again, no labels, but the idea of under students from underserved backgrounds or under-resourced schools. We had Penn Charter College Prep in the summer, and my mentor got me involved to teach English, and these were public school kids, African American and Hispanic, whose counselors had said, if you can keep this kid working, this kid can go to college and succeed. And so, I was in there with these kids out of Germantown High School and other high schools in Philadelphia, and they were working hard, and it was a marvelous experience. But again, people weren't talking as explicitly about categories. I was just looking at individual young people. Um, Back then in the 80s, I also learned, this was the late 80s after I had left television news and returned to Penn Charter because TV news didn't touch my heart the way the young people did, a simpler time. And the students, especially some of those kids whose parents hadn't been to college, they really relied upon the visitors to Penn Charter for those conversations. And then some of them had the opportunity to travel and actually visit colleges. And
Let me ask you a question, Chris. And well, first of all, how long did you say on the school side?
on the school side, it's most of my career. At Penn Charter, it was a total of 6 years. Then in the early 90s, I was at the International School of Brussels in Europe as a teacher and a college counselor, helping the North American kids apply to head back either to the States or to Ontario, Canada. And that was a fascinating experience because I was looking back at the United States and learning about the Canadian universities in Ontario, visiting 8 of them, and I was learning a lot about the differences between the advanced placement program and the international baccalaureate, and learning a lot about and gaining great respect for how demanding the international baccalaureate is and how it was make or break for the true Europeans who needed it as a credential to go to their home country universities. And the 3 higher level courses, the 3 subsidiary level courses, the theory of knowledge course, the extended essay, the internal assessments, the external assessments. I mean, I was impressed. And the European kids for whom it was make or break, they didn't have extracurricular lives the way the Americans did, who were, you know, we were the only international school in the world that had an American football team. We played all the Department of defense high school teams in Germany and Belgium. And we had homecoming for the American kids. And the Europeans were looking at the American kids, what's this? But I learned a lot about the maturity and the seriousness of purpose of international students, which helped me enormously farther down the road. So the Brussels experience was great. I then was the upper school director at the Berkeley Carroll School in Park Slope, Brooklyn. And there I experienced for the first time parental pressure on administrators, on faculty to get their kids into AP courses, honors courses. The strength of program issue had become so powerful that in some cases students were being pushed beyond where they could really be successful. And it was the first time that I saw signs of stress surrounding workload regarding expectation. And it's only gotten worse. I also, in the 90s, and some of this was having to do with having been a journalist for a time, having gone to the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia, I was maybe more sensitive to the media than other educators. And I got the first sense of how crazy the media was getting in covering the most selective colleges and universities. And they started using the word elite that has refused to die over and over. And we've gone from, it had to be the Ivy League to now it has to be the Ivy Plus. And some of that is why a number of years later in the Virgin Islands started writing my newspaper column to try to counteract in a small way some of that, because it began to seem to me that every editor at the New York Times and the Washington Post and some of the other publications must have a child in the college process, because it seemed to be what they wanted to write about or have their reporters write about too often and was good for anybody. And there's a phrase in the news business, names make news. And the problem is you keep citing the same names in the headlines and people keep reading those stories, and it just gins up more and more anxiety, and trying to tamp that down related to the rankings issue is a real challenge.
Friends, this concludes this part of my interview with Chris Teare. We hope you join us next week for the next segment. On Thursday's episode, Julia and I will have a 2-part lengthy conversation in response to a SpeakPipe question from a listener who wants to know whether or not they should work with an outside independent counselor when they're at a private school, or does this create a conflict? That is so complicated that I've avoided answering this question for 7 months. When I wrote my book, I said this is the hardest chapter for me to write in my book. But Julie and I decided to face our fears and take it head on. So we'll be answering that. It's over an hour conversation. So we'll be answering that over the next few weeks. And then Linda and Lisa are also going to answer another SpeakPipe question that came in from a listener, Anonymous, who wants to know about different online comparison tools out there. Are there any that are recommended? What advice do you have when it comes to using all of these college online comparison tools? And then Lisa's back again for part 2 of her interview with Queen's University of Charlotte VP Adrian Amador Odi, and they're talking about Queen's University in Charlotte. And by the way, friends, next Monday, I'm going to do a deep dive on this new bill that just passed, particularly focused on the implications for higher ed, but we'll get to that next Monday. Friends, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Linda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionos Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.